Hello and welcome to my presentation for the 2025 Georgia State University Perimeter College Mario A.J. Bennekin Black History Symposium, Echoes of Resilience, Black Artistry, History, and Identity. The title of my presentation is I Ain't Got No Quarrel with Them Vietcong, the Black Anti-War Art of Emory Douglas. The title of this presentation is taken from a statement made by Muhammad Ali, then world heavyweight boxing champion, to a group of reporters in 1966. Ali said this and more as his reason for resisting the draft during the Vietnam War. Although he did receive a prison sentence, in addition to being fined and stripped of his title for his actions, his resistance reflects a wider understanding of the war in Vietnam and the movement against it. My academic research looks at a global movement against U.S. intervention in Southeast Asia, particularly from the revolutionary anti-imperialism of the long 60s, that is, roughly between 1955 and 1975, and almost exclusively in the part of the world we used to call the Third World, or more accurately, the nations of the non-aligned movement, meaning aligned not with the First World or the Second World, but predicated on its own models of development. That is, with the understanding that the First World included the United States and its allies, the Second World included the Soviet Union and its allies, and the Third World was very much everybody else. This is significant when applied to the Black Freedom Movement in the United States, especially as it radicalized into the latter half of the 1960s, when the movement gravitated progressively closer to Third World national liberation and began to imagine itself as part of the Third World in the struggle for self-determination. Cold War hotspots of national liberation like Cuba, Algeria, and Vietnam served as models for self-determination, and members of a radicalized black movement in the United States began to see themselves as part and parcel of this global anti-imperialism. The Black Panther Party for Self-Defense was one of the largest and most influential organizations that emerged as a backlash to racism and racial violence in the United States. In addition to policing the police, for example, a practice that sought to curtail police brutality against blacks, especially inner city young black men, the Black Panthers also defended civil liberties and provided food for the hungry and general aid to the needy. Naturally stigmatized as a terrorist and criminal organization by the FBI and local authorities, the Black Panther Party was consistently persecuted into the underground. In this presentation, we're going to take a look at some of Emory Douglas's artwork that connected the position of the Black Panther Party to anti-imperialism, global national liberation, and by extension, the anti-war movement of the Vietnam era. The official newspaper of the Black Panther Party was called the Black Panther, and revolutionary artist Emory Douglas, whose work we will be looking at today, was the party's Minister of Culture. The Black Panther was founded as a 4-page newspaper by party founders Bobby Seale and Huey P. Newton in Oakland, California in 1967. Within a year, this more or less newsletter publication grew to a full newspaper with national and international circulation. Here, I wanted to show the covers of the first and last issues of the Black Panther. As early as the first issue, we can see the symbolic use of the pig. The pig had been used as a derogatory term for police specifically, but for authority figures in general since the 19th century. It disappeared and then resurfaced in the anti-establishment culture of the long 60s. Emory Douglas used the image of the pig profusely in the Black Panther as an anti-imperialist and anti-fascist statement. Here we see a picture of a young Douglas at around the time he was in the Black Panther Party. On the right is a sample of his work titled Oppression, which showcases his artistic style but also his exposure of what, to him, was afflicting young and poor blacks in the United States in the long 60s, which included, of course, as you can see from this illustration here, substandard living conditions, cold, hunger, and sickness without access to doctors, which the Black Panther Party sought to alleviate, as noted by the buttons on the boy's shirt advocating and advertising and promoting members of the party itself. The publication shared the party's opinion that domestic state violence was inseparable from American aggression abroad. It's all the same was the name of the painting on the left here from September 28, 1968, and it illustrates that all state violence is similar whether the pig is used at the local level, the national level, or internationally as it was engaged in Southeast Asia. The work on the right illustrated a piece about the corporatization of sole radio stations by investors criticized for wanting to promote anti-revolutionary programming and control black communities in cities like Boston, Buffalo, and Pittsburgh. It also incorporates the larger anti-imperialist world of revolutionary nationalism by denouncing similar treatment of Spanish-language radio stations in Miami, for example, being bought for the purpose of garnering anti-revolutionary support from exiled Cubans. As the images show here, it is a larger criticism of Richard Nixon's invocation of black capitalism to indoctrinate the black community. One way to interpret this cartoon on the right-hand side here is that black capitalism is a thin blade of grass in the shadow of a larger U.S. imperialism, and once that is cut down, it will have no protection. As this banner from one of the publication sections shows, the paper always took a third worldist national liberation position. Here we see a repeated banner that appeared to announce international news in very much all of their issues, definitely the issues that I looked at, which were mostly in the long 60s period. But who we see here is Congolese President Patrice Lumumba on the left-hand side here, who was murdered pretty much by the CIA. Ho Chi Minh in the middle here, who became the communist nationalist leader of North Vietnam and the communist Vietnamese in general. And then, of course, Ernesto Che Guevara, who was an Argentine doctor who became pretty much an outsized symbol and emblem of the long 60s resistance and revolution against imperialism and colonialism. And he was also killed in action in Bolivia in 1967, pretty much at the behest of the CIA, among other interest groups. But these are all of the time some of the symbolic, emblematic representations of third world liberation, which the Black Panther Party, and by extension, of course, the visual arts and cultural aspect of the newspaper itself, of the Black Panther newspaper, adopted as well. Here we see another example of this kind of international third worldism. Here in a centerfold spread from 1968, perhaps the most eventful year of the long 60s, Emory Douglas helped place the Black Panther Party and the black struggle in the U.S. in general smack dab in the middle of a wider global struggle against imperialist oppression. In this work by Emory Douglas that we see here on the screen, you can see that, again, it's a representation from left to right of what could be construed as African liberation, liberation at home, Southeast Asian liberation movements, Native American, probably Latin American, with an emblematic representation of what would appear to be perhaps a Mexican peasant rebel, right? This image here really brings together the zeitgeist, if you will, or the climate, right, of the of the revolutionary anti-imperialism of the long 60s. And of course, the artists, and definitely in this case Emory Douglas, lost no time and no opportunity in bringing all this together for the purposes of kind of representing what the Black Panther Party, where the Black Panther Party saw itself within the Black liberation movement in the United States, but also as a part of a larger global movement. So these are more or less self-explanatory images that Emory Douglas used here in various years. As you can see, 1969 was a very busy year, if you want to say that, in the escalation of the war in Vietnam, but also of the beginning of the removal of U.S. troops. And Emory Douglas and the Black Panther Party lost no time in reminding its American readership of things like you see here, right? The fact that we have a much broader fight, much more important fight at home from the perspective of the Black experience, not a fight in Vietnam, which is not seen as their fight. One of the main ideas that was sold here was the idea that this war was not, a war that pertained necessarily the Black experience, and the Black people had no place in it, right? More or less that, like I said before, the Vietnamese were fighting a very similar fight as Blacks in America. Again, as you can see, some of the repetition of the pig in the caricatured cartoon form, representing for the most part, by this point, the U.S. State Department and the symbols of authority and power. Same here, you have this very much international criticism and attack of the pig, now kind of suggesting here a couple of things, maybe dressed like Uncle Sam, kind of pointing to not only the State Department but also imperialism itself. And this pig here sees himself caught in a typical booby trap of what was being experienced in Southeast Asia in the asymmetrical guerrilla warfare that was being used as the resistance and as the defense. The pig always had these flies surrounding him because of the kind of pointing at this idea that he was that he stunk, right? That he was dirty. And then, of course, you've got the representations of the weapons on the right-hand side of the image here, with all the places where this authority and this pig are seen to have kind of been intervened in, where he didn't belong, according to the Black Panther Party. The ghetto, meaning the inner city in the United States, experiencing the issues that it was in the latter half of the 1960s, as well as Latin America, Asia, and Africa. And it was just a global, international, if you will, maybe transnational message of not belonging and getting out. And in case you have not noticed, the images that have been showing in this presentation have come to you, first of all, from the Black Panther newspaper itself, but also in chronological order, so you can kind of see the change through time and the evolution of these illustrations. In 1970, with a Vietnamization led by Richard Nixon, which was, to put in simple nutshell terms, a policy that would eventually remove American troops from Southeast Asia and replace them with Asian troops, specifically South Vietnamese. And this had the collateral effect of dragging heretofore neutral countries into the war, countries like Cambodia, for example, and Laos, who have been more or less out of the war and in a de jure fashion, were now kind of dragged into the war. And this, of course, had a lot of backlash in the anti-war movement here in the United States. And these images here show the fact that, yeah, war is hell where they're fighting now. And as you can see, some of the symbolism again, like the booby traps going through the boot of that pig, the tattered flag, the wounded nose, right? But they were also pretty bad at home. As you can see in the pig on the right, running kind of like the pig in the other drawing, in the other illustration on the right-hand side, looking very tattered and waving a surrender flag. By now, what the Black Panther Party newspaper, through the artwork of Emory Douglas, is trying to show is that by early 1970, it was already beginning to look like the understanding was that the U.S., or rather American imperialism, was losing the war. Again, images here from mid-1970 and then early 1971 kind of point at that direction on the left is showing a tattered pig, completely transformed from the way that the United States started this fight. And then you see not only the domestic issues like you see in Kent, Ohio, with the demonstrations and the escalations of that, the killings of students. And then on the right-hand side now, you've got not only the rest of the Indo-Chinese area coming into the fight with Cambodia and Laos, but also, as you can see, including what the Panther Party is associating with this kind of global struggle is Palestine as well. And then on the right-hand side, we have here the cover used the artwork of Emory Douglas to highlight a little section of a letter written by Huey P. Newton, who was the Supreme Commander and Minister of Defense of the Black Panther Party in August of 1970, to the National Liberation Front and the Provisional Revolutionary Governments of South Vietnam, offering an undetermined number of troops to assist in their fight against American imperialism. The reply came 2 months later from Nguyen Thi Dinh, Deputy Commander of the South Vietnam People's Liberation Armed Forces, that said basically notice of the enthusiastic proposal had been taken with profound gratitude, and that volunteers would be called when necessary. By this point, going into 1971, the Black Panther Party was very much offering to send volunteer troops to Vietnam to continue and contribute to the fight against American imperialism. Far cry from the purposes of American GIs in Vietnam, of course. The back cover poster for the September 11, 1971 issue of the Black Panther newspaper, as you see here on the left, reflected several issues that the party was concerned with, like the Vietnam War, but also the consistent drug abuse in the black community. So now we see this very interesting mixture here of domestic and international into one poster. So you have the American GI in the background with supposedly what we would assume to be a Vietnamese child. And then we have a scene from drug abuse and the effects that has on the youth in the black community, especially in the inner cities. And then later on in January of 1973, we see an image that refers to the ongoing Vietnam War, but also the refusal of young black men to participate in it. So this kind of call to resist, calling it a peace with honor, kind of echoing what the political statements at the times of the Nixon administration were beginning to call it. Kind of figure out a way to extricate the United States from this war with as much honor as possible. That is being interpreted here by the Black Panther Party, its newspaper, and its Minister of Culture, Emory Douglas, as a call to continue resisting the draft. These images here, what I wanted to show was an example of something that is used in ephemera art, especially in that kind of ephemera that aims to send kind of quick repetition messages that might change. For example, typical in the long 60s was a campus college that would have a wall or some kind of a flat surface where propaganda, posters, invitations, announcements, and news were placed very quickly, sometimes from one day to the next. That kind of placing ephemera art on top of each other, where you can see sometimes remnants of the old work, but sometimes it gets ripped or halfway ripped, is very typical and emblematic of a college campus with a lot of social activity of this sort. Well, this is called a palimpsest. And a palimpsest is this kind of building on top of an already existing message or artwork or ephemera. It could be song lyrics, kind of sky's the limit with that. But we do see it happen a lot, especially when we look at the artwork in focus today of Emory Douglas, as you see on the right-hand side here. So in 1968, this group of visual artists from, at the time, revolutionary Chile, called the Larrea brothers, reproduced the image that you see on the left-hand side here, all right, from Chinese propaganda. So this, what you see here, is an album cover for a group from a movement called the Chilean New Song Movement. And this is what we would call something akin to propaganda music or protest music, committed music, right? And this group, called Quilapayún, in 1968 made an album dedicated, as you can see from the title, to Vietnam. So this was part of a revolutionary Chilean solidarity with the Vietnamese people in their struggle. And they used this image, which one of the Larrea brothers, one of the artists, found in a waiting room in the back of a Chinese propaganda magazine, which he said there were many of at the time in Chile. And he saw this image of this guerrilla fighter with the weapon in the air, surrounded by others who were doing the same, and then took it through his, techniques and art to come up with this record cover. Well, a year later, in 1969, the Weather Underground, a radicalized faction of the Students for a Democratic Society in the U.S., this was part of the U.S.-based New Left movement, as you can see here, used the same image in the middle here to advertise what was called the Days of Rage demonstrations against U.S. intervention in Vietnam. This was scheduled for October 11th of 1969. And then, that same year, in 1969, Emory Douglas adapted the image from a Vietnamese guerrilla to a black militant to accomplish pretty much the same purpose or the same message, right? This image here, as you can see from the writing here, was accompanied with Joseph Stalin's 1905 speech quote, which said, "Only on the bones of the oppressors." According to Douglas, the prominence of gun images harked back at the party's 1966 10-point program that included the position that we believe we can end police brutality in our black community by organizing black self-defense groups that are dedicated to defending our black community from racist police oppression. This example here of a palimpsest, right, shows us a repeated image, or at least a repeated idea of an image, which was widely used at the time, but by a group of people who transnationally shared the same purposes of fighting against imperialism throughout the world, focused on this one particular event of what was being perceived as imperialism at the time, and imperialist intervention by the United States, specifically in Southeast Asia. And here on the left is an image of Emory Douglas about 10, 11 years ago. He's still alive today. Kind of looks pretty much like he does in this picture here, so he hasn't really aged much in those years, and continues to be active, more than anything inspiring young movements of social justice. For a fact, I know that a group of prints made by an artist to support the Black Lives Matters movement gave him credit for allowing him to use this kind of same type of image that you immediately associate with Emory Douglas, in an effort to show, again, pretty possibly here, like a modern version, a continuing version of the palimpsest that I talked about earlier. And on the right-hand side there, you have a QR code if you'd like to contribute to this survey. All the images you saw today, unless otherwise noted, were from the Black Panther newspaper archive itself, which can be found at Marxist.org. Obviously, if anybody is interested in accessing this and would like to contact me, my Georgia State University contact information is jvalenzuela1 at gsu.edu. That is J, V as in Victor, ALENZUELA 1 at gsu.edu. I hope you liked the presentation today, and hopefully you will be going back and paying some attention to this artwork. Have a good day. Thank you.